You may think from the title that the conclusion is foregone, but I'm going to ask you, how many of you think there's not enough policing? Nobody. How many think it's just about right? Nobody. How many think there's too much? Okay. Well, it might interest you to know that people like Heather Higgins, who has the Independent Women's Forum, has dubbed a Ferguson effect, that in the aftermath of the Black Lives Matter movement, police have withdrawn from the inner cities, and as a result, the murder rate is now up 9% in the largest 63 cities in the country. So she sees that as a sign of there's under-policing. We live in Oakland, and the Independent Institute is in Oakland. We had 89 homicides last year and 5 police-involved killings. 5 years ago, the Oakland Police Department released a list of 44 crimes that they would no longer respond to. They published this list. It was and it's everything. It's burglary, it's vandalism, it's essentially anything except a violent crime that's in progress. So crime went way up, so many people would call that under-policing as well. So today I'm primarily going to talk about the kind of policing that's happening, echoing the earlier talk. And basically, we believe it goes from a change in the model. So the model for most police used to be to serve and protect, right? You were their customers, they were here to help you. Today, it's moved to this. I took this picture on my way to work one day. I saw it and I went, wow, so I stopped and clicked it. And as a result of this sort of paramilitary outfit that they're wearing now, they've gone from to serve and protect to the soldier's creed, to deploy, engage, and destroy enemies, right? So not so much customer service anymore. And we see that the number of, we know about SWAT teams, they're also called police paramilitary units, and they've grown from 59% of police departments had them in 1982. In 1998, that had gone up to 78%. And in 1995, it had become, or 89%. Last year, I gave a talk to a women's group in Marin County, which is a very affluent, verdant green area north of San Francisco. And one of the members of the group is the police captain for Tiburon. And I showed that picture I just took of the tank, and she confirmed that Tiburon has 2 tanks. This is Tiburon. Why does Tiburon need 2 tanks? So this is the now classic Crisis in Leviathan. We reissued it 5 years ago with our 25th anniversary, and it's Robert Higgs's very excellent laying out of the ratchet effects. So he traced, I'm sure you know, the growth of government as responding to a series of crises. He starts with the American Civil War, goes through the 20th century, and essentially he contends and shows that government grows in the face of crises. It expands its power and its size to unprecedented levels. At the end of the crisis, it goes back down, but it never goes back to the previous level. Plus, there's now been a precedent set. So the next crisis comes along, and it grows even more. So you have this ratchet growth of government. People scream, the government must do something about the crisis, and the government is happy to oblige. The problem we face now is our crises aren't ending, right? They're endless. So the quintessential modern crisis is the war on drugs. In 1971, Nixon declared drug abuse public enemy number 1. And of course, they had to create a new agency to deal with it. So in 1973, the Drug Enforcement Agency was formed. So whenever we see government growing, we have to ask, well, who's benefiting? Cui bono? Who benefits from it? Well, in the case of the war on drugs, the case of growth of government, bureaucrats, right? They don't get increased profits by growing. So success in a bureaucracy is measured by the size of their budget and the size of their staff. The military, by providing weapons, training, and equipment to police, increases its own size and scope. And of course, the police has an incentive. They have these neat new toys to play with. They have an incentive to use them. Plus, they want to get more, so they want to use them to show that they need them, so they need more, and so on, and add more people. So you get a drug war industry, essentially. It's government agencies, technocrats, consultants, private firms, the people who make the equipment, and so on. So in the aftermath of the creation of the Drug Enforcement Agency, we see that drug arrests grew from about 375, that there were virtually none in the early 70s until it became apparent that we needed to arrest people for drugs. So in 1980, it was up to 375,000. By 1990, it had more than doubled to 1 million. The war on drugs was supported by a vast PR campaign. You had public service announcements on the radio and TV, informing parents and children of how dangerous drug use is. And there was one very famous commercial of a frying pan, and an egg gets cracked into it, and it says, "This is your brain," and it starts cooking. It says, "This is your brain on drugs," and things like that. Nancy Reagan, when she was First Lady, launched the Just Say No campaign, anti-drug campaign. You had the police going into schools, leading the Drug Abuse Resistance Education Program, DARE. And so public opinion polls, sure enough, show that drug abuse grows from not a large concern among the public to like the #1 concern among the public, and the government must do something about it. And the government is always, again, happy to oblige. So in 1981, the Military Cooperation with Law Enforcement Act was passed. It had increased the use of the National Guard and Coast Guard in the war on drugs and freed of previous constraints on their use domestically. During the Vietnam War, Nixon sent the National Guard onto college campuses to quell protests. And when they killed 3 students on the campus of Kent State University in Ohio, there was a huge uproar, right? But by 1981, people were near to it. We have to have them helping us with this terrible crisis. So as the benefits keep accruing, we again come back and say, well, who's benefiting from this? The police departments are becoming increasingly dependent on federal anti-drug funding, right? Before they subsisted on local funding. Now they've got all this federal money being poured at them that's giving them all this great equipment. And they have an opportunity to increase this, get more windfall profits from the feds by showing that they need it more by pushing for more drug laws, harsher sentences, and so on. The prison guard unions, right? If there are increased penalties for drug crimes, you have more prisoners, so you need more prison guards who join the union. And you have the growth of private prison companies, such that today the revenue of the 2 largest private prison firms is $3 billion annually. So the number of prisoners held on drug-related charges has risen from 41,000 in 1980 to 500,000 in 2007. And the number of prisoners in private prisons has grown from about 8,000 in 1990 to 130,000 in 2009. In 1997, Congress passed Program 1033, which allowed the Department of Defense to transfer excess equipment to state and local law enforcement. In 1 year alone, the value of the transfers increased from $212 million to $500 million. I think that's probably when Larkspur got its second tank. The result is that technologies that once were used exclusively by the military are common in every police department across the country, up to things like facial recognition software, satellite tracking. All the kind of neato-kino stuff we see in these movies is just everyday stuff in police departments across the country. And then, of course, came the granddaddy crisis of them all, 9/11, unleashing the war on terror, you had immediately calls to turn the sand into silicon, which is code for, nuke them, right? And roundup of Muslims, panic in the streets, and flags absolutely everywhere. I mean, the flag industry must have had, talk about windfall profits. And it's amazing to me, when I was preparing this talk, I got to thinking, okay, 9/11, that was 15 years ago, which means we have a whole generation, namely you, who doesn't remember what the United States was like before 9/11. It was a completely different country. It was a completely different culture. At Independent Institute, I'm proud to say, we're here on the West Coast, so it was pretty early when the attacks happened, and that day, David Theroux, who's my husband, the founder and CEO of Independent, immediately said, we've got to get a statement on the homepage, and people were going, oh, no. Feelings are raw, we've got to be careful. He said, no, we have to do this today. We have to stand up and say. So we put up a statement expressing, extreme sorrow about the attacks and condolences to the victims and so on, but warning, don't let this be used for the government to grow itself in new and massive ways. We refined it, and 4 days later, we released it as a press release. But despite such warnings, you just had people changing overnight from what they believed in. So a few days before 9/11, there was a Gallup poll. 6% of Americans said they trusted the government to handle domestic concerns. 14% trusted them to handle foreign problems. A month later, after 9/11, that had jumped to 77% trusting the government to handle domestic problems and 83% to handle foreign problems. Confidence in the military jumped from 44% to 71%. Support for the police jumped from 48% to 5%. And attitudes completely changed. Things we never would have considered appropriate for the government to do before is now just hunky-dory. Sure, use facial recognition software. Use cameras and surveillance technologies. Yeah, monitor our cell phones, our emails, the internet uses. And yeah, of course, we're going to have to give up our liberties for safety. It was interesting because it turns out such trust in the government was very likely extremely misplaced. Numerous accounts came out that there had been a lot of warnings to the government that they had failed to follow up on, including by FBI field agents. So the memo came out from FBI field agents in Phoenix to the FBI headquarters in Washington, D.C., urging them to conduct a national investigation into flight schools, that something was going on, and it named Osama bin Laden. The other question that many of us asked at the time is, if the Defense Department can't even defend its own headquarters, namely the Pentagon, and it gets a plane thrown into it, then what is it defending? But instead of people asking these hard questions, they agreed, yes, definitely, the solution is to create a new government agency over it all, the Department of Homeland Security. Well, whose homeland was the Defense Department defending it, that you need a new department? On the legislative front, they rushed into print and passed immediately the Uniting and Strengthening America by Providing Appropriate Tools Required to Intercept and Obstruct Terrorism Act of 2001, which is the USA Patriot Act. It was 342 pages. The text was not provided to Congress before it was introduced, and it was voted on the next day. People like Ron Paul asked for a copy of it and couldn't get it. And so it was indeed passed when they hadn't read it. Michael Moore, when he made his documentary Fahrenheit 9/11, made fun of Congress for passing a law that they hadn't read. But of course, when Obamacare was passed and the same thing came out, there wasn't a lot of mention of it. So it's just sort of standard operating procedure at your Congress. As a result of the USA Patriot Act, the government, in the words of some subsequent NSA whistleblowers, completely uncoupled itself from the Constitution. I kid you not, this agency was set up in January 2002 by the Defense Advanced Research Projects Agency, DARPA, the Total Information Awareness Office, and this was their logo. It was centralizing all intelligence gathering, all surveillance on a massive scale. Now, unfortunately, they let it get out. They really shouldn't have made this logo because it kind of freaked people out, and there was a protest. So they pretended that they ended it, but Snowden's revelations later showed that they didn't. They just ran it under different names. Well, people who protest the police have too much power are often answered with, if you're not doing anything wrong, you don't have anything to worry about, right? Well, as my former brother-in-law taught me, driving while black is a problem. And similarly with surveillance, we're told, well, if you don't have anything to hide, you shouldn't mind that they're listening to your cell phone calls, they're reading your emails, and so on. But we know from history that that's not true. This is the Cardinal Richelieu, made notorious by the Three Musketeers. And if you can't read that, it says, if you give me 6 lines written by the hand of the most honest of men, I will find something in them with which to hang him. And Joseph Stalin's secret police chief succinctly said, show me the man and I'll find you the crime. And they certainly did. They used it very effectively. These are just a few of the programs. It's hard to see that we found out about the NSA thanks to some NSA whistleblowers and others. PRISM was probably the most famous, but the government was sucking all data through AT&T, Verizon, Sprint, Facebook, Apple, Google, Microsoft, Yahoo, AOL, and others, and they didn't allow them to tell anybody that they were passing on everything that you were doing using their services. 3 whistleblowers came forward, tried to come forward from the NSA, veteran NSA. I should have had a picture of them. They're the most mild-mannered looking guys in the world. They'd been in the NSA for an average of 30 years. And very early on in the Bush administration, they tried to come forward and, again, in the words, let people know that the government had completely decoupled itself from the Constitution. It was doing all of these things that they knew it was not supposed to be doing. All of them got stripped of their security clearances. All of them had their homes raided by the FBI. One of them had a young child who was held at gunpoint while they searched the house. They all lost their jobs. And some of them were charged under crimes that carried life sentences, life imprisonment sentences. There's a very good documentary about it. I forget the name of it, but Google, NSA whistleblower documentary or something, and it's quite good. So it's no wonder that Snowden took another route rather than doing the official whistleblower route, because he saw what happened to these guys. So he went straight to the press. And interestingly, while everybody was screaming, Snowden's a traitor, Snowden's a traitor, they asked these 3 NSA whistleblowers, is he a traitor? And they said no, he had no choice. Now, one of them thought he went too far, that he disclosed more information than he should have, because he did disclose information he thought endangered current agents and so on. But they universally said, he's a hero. He needed to let the American people know that this is what's going on. However, the problem with how public the treatment of the NSA whistleblowers and Edward Snowden has been, and now Snowden's living in exile and kind of an uncertain exile in Russia, because Russia hasn't said he can stay there forever, is if anybody else is thinking about disclosing things who's still in the government, I'm sure they're thinking long and hard, do I really want to give up my entire life to let people know what's going on? So I'm sure that in the years since we learned about these things, and Snowden's information now is quite old, there's bound to be plenty of things that's expanded, more powerful, about which we do not know. We do know that this facility came online, the NSA's Bluffdale data center that holds 5 zettabytes of storage. which is all content of all global communications for 100 years. So they're just vacuuming up everything, right, and storing it. They're not even bothering to look at it. They just stick it in there. And again, if they decide down the road, well, Julia's a troublemaker, let's go pull out some of her emails and edit them, and we can prove that she's a traitor and put her away for the rest of her life. The other problem with collecting vast numbers of data, in the words of one intelligence expert, is the false positives will kill you, right? It's like it's bigger than a needle in a haystack. So if you're trying to find evidence of plots or whatever, and they're trying to develop all these algorithms that can go through the data and find clues, there's something. There's so much data, it's just noise. They're not able to find anything meaningful. So it's just, they're replacing garbage for police work, right? They're not doing police work anymore, they're just sucking everything up. And of course, capturing all of our communications wasn't enough. They expanded the Patriot Act with subsequent bills. They redefined the United States, the homeland, is under threat. AKA, it's a battlefield. Therefore, the rules of war apply, not civil liberties, not constitutional protections, and many, many things can be done that we wouldn't have thought were okay before. Obama's Attorney General even released a memo, famously, which laid out the legal case for how Obama could order the killing of US citizens. We know he's done so directly with US citizens living abroad, at least 4 that have been killed on Obama's direct orders, probably more. And he's laid out the case for they can even do it here at home. That's worth a Nobel Peace Prize, I think. So when somebody says, given the new reality of an existential threat from terrorism, we have no choice but to sacrifice our liberty for security, paraphrasing Nancy Reagan, just say no. Just say no to every single effort at fear-mongering. We have always lived under an existential threat, right? When I grew up, the Soviet Union was going to nuke us. That Cold War morphed into a hot war. In the 70s, pollution was terrible. That's morphed into, and plus there was going to be a new ice age. At one point, they thought they needed to explode something to cover the ice caps to prevent a new ice age. And then that morphed into global warming, and of course now we have climate change, which is an existential threat. So you just have to say no to it and hold to principle and say this is not something that we're going to turn over our liberties to government to take care of. So where are we? Well, we're fighting powerful special interests that are more ingrained than ever. We have the police, as we've said. Police have more money, more equipment, more personnel. They have all their shiny toys that they're using all the time, every day. There are hundreds and thousands of SWAT raids daily. Unfortunately, sometimes they make mistakes and go to the wrong house and kill somebody in the process, but it's the way it goes. Then there's the military-industrial complex with whole new aspects to it. So today there's a drone lobby, right? And in 1 year alone, 2011, it doubled its budget for lobbying in order to get this neat new resolution passed that resulted in $200 million contract for one drone manufacturer, and there are more than one drone manufacturer. And here we are in Silicon Valley, and I heard some of you talk positively about our hope is Silicon Valley, but the fact of the matter is much of Silicon Valley came out of Department of Defense projects. Oracle famously is named for the CIA project that started it. QTEL is the CIA's Silicon Valley Venture Capital Fund, so they invest in startups and companies, and in return for which they have access to all of the neat stuff they're developing. The encryption that we hope is protecting us, the privacy we hope is protecting us. All of the new technology is going straight to the government. Palantir, Peter Thiel's big data company is sucking up lots and lots of data and giving it to the government, and it's getting $1 billion a year in revenues in 2014 alone. When I first saw Google Earth, my thought was, how on earth are they paying to be able to do that? And of course it came out that the NSA was giving them money because it's really neat information for them to have. Furthermore, in the 2010 census, every census taker had a GPS marker, and they marked the front door of every home in America. So it's really neat. You take those two things and you have GPS coordinates for every address in America, and you have all this neat stuff that's coming out of places like Google. And you can, with pinpoint accuracy, I don't know, maybe send a drone in or a missile or something, but here we are. Even people, Elon Musk is upheld as this great entrepreneur, and of course Tesla and SpaceX are total products of government subsidies. There's a rumor, and they're completely dependent on more government subsidies, right? They will not continue to exist unless the government keeps giving them more money. There's a rumor that he's currently meeting with the government, trying to get more money for SpaceX, and offering in return that he will help them get access to the new encryption technology and other things that are being developed in Silicon Valley. So, President Obama is at Stanford today at the Global Entrepreneur Summit, which turns out is actually a government-funded series of summits that's been taking place all around the world. And it's a very cozy arrangement. So just like we learn about other established businesses, Silicon Valley is not immune from the overtures of government. It's not immune to the corruption of government. And if we're not careful, it will contribute to a technocracy that none of us will like living under. So the Fourth Amendment, as we said, has effectively been shredded. Do not look to it for protection. And as we've seen, and our friend William Lord Garrison told us, to get rid of it, we can't do it gradually. We can't issue calls for reform. We can't say, oh, let's constrain this agency. Let's pass a law that'll protect these rights better. You have to deal with it on a wholesale basis. Yes, there are lots of guys with lots of guns and lots of power. Yes, there's a pretty effective technocracy. Plus, we have a very confused, miseducated public. We have a general public that has unlearned liberty, courtesy of the public education department, and we've lost a lot of the traditions that I'm sure you've been talking about this week. I'm sure when you talk to friends and colleagues and so on, you don't hear a lot of understanding of the principles of liberty, why it's important, and so on. So we have to deal with these not on a gradual, piecemeal basis, try to make things a little bit better. We're going to have to change it completely. When our older son was a little boy, he liked to be tucked in bed at night and talk. He liked to talk at night as he was going to sleep. And one night he asked me if I had ever broken a law. And I said, I'm sure that I break a law every day because there are just so many laws. And that was in the 1990s. So it's not that we know we all break a law every day. We all probably commit a felony every day, as this article and other things will be. Everything has been criminalized. So we have wars on things. We have wars on drugs and on terror. But we've also criminalized lots of behaviors we don't like. If you're a deadbeat dad, it's criminal, right? If you cut down a tree in your yard, it can be criminal and punishable by prison. As that article points out, a man who violated the packaging laws of Honduras by putting a lobster in cardboard instead of styrofoam or vice versa, right, gets put in prison. And these wars on things, there's no end to them, right? When do we know we've won the war on drugs? Well, we're never going to win it at this rate. When do we know we've won the war on terror? I read yesterday that the FBI director wants to define the Orlando attack as terrorism so he can get more funding to fight the terrorism that's going on. And we have to remember that we have to be prepared to enforce every single law with force. That's why it's called enforce, including and up to possibly death, right? So whenever we're saying, oh, that sounds like a good idea, that law sounds like a good idea, ask people to think about it. Okay, is it such a good law that you're willing for somebody to die for it? And they may think that's absurd. But why was Eric Garner killed? He was violating the New York City cigarette tax. He was selling single cigarettes on the street, right? Trying to make a living. People who are poor and can afford the $20 a pack cigarettes because of the taxes that are on it are voluntarily buying single cigarettes from him, and the cops kill him. So it's not hypothetical, it's real. So you can tell anybody who's saying, well, there ought to be a law. Say, oh, really? Should it be punishable by death? And oh, that's absurd. It's not absurd. Ultimately, that's what it implies. So when we talk about police brutality, it's pretty inevitable. If you pass more laws, there are going to be more arrests. If there are more arrests, there's more use of force. If there's more use of force, there's a much greater probability that it's going to be brutal and fatal. It's just a law of numbers. More laws, more brutality. So what are the solutions? Again, we have to do this in broad brushes. We cannot reverse this gradually. Well, got to end the war on drugs, of course. Education, as we've seen, is far more effective in reducing drug use than criminalization. The DARE project, where the police go into public schools and they teach kids that drugs are bad, has actually been shown to increase experimentation with drugs, right? Because police are like the ultimate authority symbol. What do kids like to do? Rebel against authority. So the cops come in, say drugs are bad, and they say, well, better try them. Contrast that with something like Tom Siebel, who's a Silicon Valley, made a lot of money here, has been spending his post-retirement years with this meth project, and it's fantastic. He started in Montana, where he has a ranch, because of course meth is especially a problem in rural areas. It's a PR campaign. He does really gritty ads, videos that are online, billboards that show the effects of meth on real people that look like you and me. And it's a very effective, it's proven very effective to reverse the climbing numbers of the meth epidemic. So those kinds of things are much better. You know, how do we deal? We saw alcohol prohibition be disastrous and result in a very violent society in the 1930s, so repealed it. So how do we deal subsequently with alcohol abuse, right? What do we do about drunk driving? It's primarily been dealt with through education, telling people, and you guys especially, it's been drummed into you all your lives, don't drink and drive. You know, you may be drinking, but you're not involved in vehicular manslaughter mostly. Very few people smoke cigarettes these days, and again, that's been mostly an educational thing. It's not good for you. I personally am not for people using drugs, but it shouldn't be criminalized. You know, you should not use them out of your free choice. That's not the highest and best use of your time and your body. Replace unaccountable military and police with privateers. In Oakland, in the aftermath of the Oakland police releasing this list of 44 crimes, and we had, guess what, every criminal came to Oakland, we all went into action. We formed neighborhood watch groups. We hired private security companies, and the private security company that our HOA employs Their model is just presence and familiarity. So they have an agent, what in the olden days would have been a cop on the beat, who knows the neighborhood. He knows the patterns of the neighborhood. He knows who's there. We have a huge public high school, very dysfunctional public high school in the middle of our neighborhood. It's 54 acres with 2,000 kids that they bus in who are very unhappy children and tend to be violent. So it is not an idyllic suburban community. But the security guy gets to know who belongs there, who doesn't belong there, what the patterns of the neighborhood are, and if there's something that looks out of place, if there's somebody who looks out of place, he approaches it and says, may I help you find where you're going? And if indeed it's somebody who's lost, he helps them where they're going. If indeed it's somebody looking to cause trouble, they now know they're being watched and they go someplace else to cause trouble. Article 1, Section 8 of the Constitution provides for Congress to issue so-called letters of marque and reprisal. And in the aftermath of 9/11, we called for them to do so against Osama bin Laden. Ron Paul actually introduced a bill on the floor to do so, but privateers are bounty hunters. Thomas Jefferson used them to great effect in taking care of the Barbary pirate problem, and they were very, very good, but they are paid for performance. They have a specific target. Go get these guys who are causing trouble, bring them into justice, and we will pay you. And if you hurt any innocents or you destroy any property belonging to others in the process, you are liable. Right? Liability, very important. Privateers, by the way, went out of favor because they made the Navy look bad. They were much better at what they were doing than the Navy, and who benefits? The Navy came along, oh, you can't have these guys, they're unaccountable. Big propaganda campaign, probably smearing them for doing something that they didn't do. And again, uphold the rule of law. The Lords rebelled against King John, made him sign Magna Carta. The king is subject to the rule of law. We need to do the same thing with our police, our mayors, our president, or anybody. No more immunity. You're subject to the same rules we are, the same laws we are, and if you break them, you're subject to the same consequences that we are. And if you cannot do the jobs that we expect you to do within the law, fire them. If they can't keep us safe and within the Fourth Amendment, within the Constitution, get rid of them and find somebody who can. They're not keeping us safe this way, so we've lost our liberty and our safety. But the only real and lasting solution is to change the culture. Yeah, there are utilitarian arguments. You can lay out a better way in all kinds of detail, but ultimately it comes down to what is right? What's the ethical thing to do? And that's what we as economists are supposed to be considering, right? The people talk about Adam Smith's Wealth of Nations, but the theory of moral sentiments was a far more famous work in its time. We're supposed to be considering the ethics of how we live, how we treat one another, natural law, abiding by. And hopefully this week, I'm sure most of you came in with a strong adherence to that belief, and hopefully this week has helped strengthen you in your convictions and helped give you the ability to be really effective communicators, so when you're in your communities, you can start working on changing the culture. That's the only thing that's going to save us. That's what we try to do all day, every day at Independent Institute. We produce studies, articles, videos, whatever, making the case for liberty in all kinds of areas. We do not work on legislation. We do not go lobby. We do not say, the Republicans are right, the Democrats are right, whatever. It's ideas. So hopefully some of our material can help you. We want to be here as a tool. Also, let us know, what can we be doing, what can we be producing that would help you more, that would be more effective in your conversations with others. We really want to know. We want to work together on how we can get this in the right direction. We can create the virtuous circle between ideas and action. Ultimately, what wins is ideas. The state is just an idea, right? It's not a thing, it's not a building, it's not a person, it's an idea. And a bad idea can be replaced with a good idea. As we've seen, these people were living under the most oppressive regime in the history of the world, right? Everything was controlled. They had no access to outside they were eavesdropped on, their neighbors were spying on them, reporting on them, and so on. Totally controlled, virtually slaves. And yet, when the idea was planted, hey, this is not a legitimate state. This is not the way we have to live. The Berlin Wall wasn't brought down by an election. It wasn't brought down by a war. It wasn't brought down by a law being passed. It was brought down by people standing up and saying, no. And if they can, we can. So let's do it. Thank you.